Hey guys, this is going to be a spoiler review of Resident Evil 8, so if you haven't played 7, 8, or any of the other games, go ahead and turn this off if you don't want to be spoiled, but if you don't care, go ahead and keep watching. I loved playing Resident Evil 7 when it first came out. This was at a time when I was learning Japanese and I had tried to play the series from the start, but I gave up halfway through playing the first one. I couldn't read all the kanji at the time. A little while after, my roommate had bought Resident Evil 7 on Steam and offered to let me play it for a few hours. I ended up beating the game that night. The thing is, I played the demo of the game around the time PT had came out, but I wasn't really dying to get the game. I just thought it was fun and, well, that's it. But when I played the game, I just got hooked. It was a lot of fun, and the constant feeling of being hunted in this claustrophobic house was so terrifying, but it was just so exciting too. The thing is, Resident Evil had started to move towards a more action-oriented style of gameplay, starting with Resident Evil 4, and this ramped up with Resident Evil 5 and 6. 7, however, felt like a return to the roots of the series, which, as it says on the box, was survival horror, as opposed to, well, just survival. So naturally, I was thinking after I beat this game, how could they possibly top this? Well, I forgot about a sequel to 7 even, because then Resident Evil 2 Remake was the new hotness, and yep, it was amazing and it got me hooked on the series again. That said, after I beat the 2 remake, naturally I waited for the 3 remake to come out, but in the time that it was being made, I moved on to other things, and then when 3 finally did come out, I just never got around to it, even now it's still on my backlog. So when 8 was announced, of course I wasn't really dying to go get the game, but I was excited, and yeah, I thought it would be fun, of course. But when that demo came out and I got a chance to go around the castle and the village, I was hooked for the upteenth time. I only got an hour to play it, of course, like everyone else, but I couldn't wait for the game to come out that week. I imported it from the States and the wait was killer, even with express shipping. But I got it, unboxed it, and popped it in, but I gotta admit, I did not see a lot coming. The interesting thing is, Resident Evil Village had started production before 7 had even been released, and while it wasn't going to necessarily be a direct sequel to 7, the huge success of that game persuaded the dev team to continue Ethan's story. The game, of course, as you might have guessed, is heavily inspired by elements of Resident Evil 4, which makes sense since, well, it's probably the most popular Resident Evil game out there. The director of the game, Mori Masasato, said, "For Resident Evil Village, we're bringing the essence of Resident Evil 4, while Resident Evil 7 functions as the base for the game. It's not a reboot of Resident Evil 4, but the offspring of both Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 4. And in that same interview, Sato brings up Resident Evil 4 quite a bit more when talking about Village. So what's going on with the story exactly? If you played 7, you know that Ethan got out safe, but now his life's been turned upside down. His wife is killed and his daughter is taken away by none other than Resident Evil Super Pro tag, Chris Redfield, who seems to look different than when he showed up in 7 for some reason. But I don't know, they always make Chris look different in every game, so yeah, I'm used to it. But here he kind of looks more like how I'd expect him to. Things turn more sour as Ethan is taken away by Chris and his buddies, but the truck he's in crashes, the baby goes missing, and now he's stuck in an Eastern European village. Except the village isn't filled with people, but instead non-people. Well, Lycans I believe they're called, but I'm not actually sure if they're werewolves or something else even after playing the game. I don't think they are. You won't find the traditional zombies here for the most part, but instead you'll find these sort of medieval looking Dark Souls dudes. They're practically the same thing though, except they got swords this time. Not only them though, but you'll see these giant monsters coming to get you as well, and they are terrifying, especially in the tight corners of the village. But yep, it's not only them, you also have these 4 bosses to pick off one by one, and then there's the head honcho, Miranda. She's the supreme leader god of the village, whom everybody worshipped until she, well, wiped them all out. Gee, thanks. The main goal of the game is to get your daughter Rose back, and essentially you have to go and collect her body parts from the 4 lords. It's pretty gross. But before all that, we have to talk about the titular village. You navigate this place as the game goes on, and you'll be able to explore areas that were originally locked or barricaded. Here, the village is essentially your hub world, leading you to the 4 major fights. I was really happy with how they handled these sections too. I thought for sure it would just be a standard fight through a section, beat a boss, the end, but it was actually a bit different than I expected. I think what felt like the longest of the 4 sections is actually the beginning one, Castle Dimitrescu. You have to take her and her 3 daughters out while trying to navigate through the castle and also trying to avoid Lady Dimitrescu, or her and her daughters will come and get you and, well, kill you. This is similar to Jack in Resident Evil 7, Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, Nemesis in 3, and so on. I think it was really well done here too. After you move past that, you go on to House Beneviento, and here we get a shift in the gameplay. It mostly focuses on puzzles since your weapons are taken away, but the horror elements are on full display here, especially when you're trying to, well, evade this thing. After that, you have to go head down to the swamps and you have to take down Moreau. Getting the flask from him is easy, but defeating him is naturally anything but. He was one of the bosses I had a hard time with, especially navigating those dangerous waters he likes to chill in. But beating him brings you to Heisenberg, and there's a twist. Before meeting up with him, you have to go to the Lycan stronghold, and my goodness is this rough. I wish I stocked up on bullets before coming into here, because the first time I was barely surviving with the sniper rifle. Although after a second playthrough I just realized that you gotta do the Resident Evil way and just run past the enemies. It's easier. And so I thought I was over here, but just kidding. You have to go to Heisenberg's factory since he's a big jerk and he wants to use your daughter for his own purposes. But he promises he won't be a bad guy, but I'm not sure I believe him. Well, that's okay because Ethan doesn't, and now you're stuck trying to get to the first floor all the way from the bottom. The whole time I'm thinking, how are you gonna fight Heisenberg since he's the seemingly invincible dude with magneto powers? The game totally took me by surprise, and you jump into a makeshift battle bot and then go into the arena with him. It's hilariously over the top, but it's a lot of fun. And then finally, when it's all said and done, you have your final showdown with Miranda to save your daughter and save the day. So where do I even begin? I might as well get this out of the way, but I had a blast playing this game. I went through it on standard at first, and then I moved on to hardcore afterwards. There is a beginner's difficulty too, and there's also an even harder one called Village of Shadows. This comes standard with the deluxe edition of the game, or you can get it by beating the game normally. Now I've seen some reviewers talk about Resident Evil 4 similarities, and the director himself said it, but to me this is just Resident Evil 7 through and through. Yes, I know there's action elements in the game, there are some things that are kind of over the top and all that, but there are just so much horror elements in this game, I think that more people are giving it credit for. The way you go through the village at first, with the sounds of the still air and not a friendly living soul in sight, is so unnerving. Sure, I know that parts like the Moreau or Heisenberg sections are very action heavy, but, you know, they have their bits of horror sprinkled in, right? Like going to the stronghold, for example, it's dimly lit, and when you walk in, you can hear the roar of the Lycans in the distance. You know they're coming for you, so you have to get ready for it. And then, of course, the initial castle and the Beneviento house are just callbacks to 7 and earlier games, too. Of course, there's no getting around the Chris section, and that's just hilariously straight up action, and I love it. Chris, in what feels like his 4th survivor moment, has you running through the village with tons of ammo and automatic weapons just to blow through monsters left and right. It's so glorious, I love this part, and it was a great change of pace that comes right at the right time. For me, it's like when you expect to let up, the game brings these horror moments right back to center stage, and you'll be nervously walking around the corners or opening up the doors very slowly. So for the most part, you point and shoot. Simple, right? Well, you're equipped in this village, thankfully, and you have the Resident Evil 4 style inventory system returning, and the merchant too. Well, this time his name's Duke, and he likes to give you advice and also sell you back your weapons for twice the price. I never said he was fair. That said, he does come through at the end to help you out, so he's a cool guy in my book. The standard weapons are here, of course, from the pistols to the shotguns, snipers, and magnums, and there's the grenade launcher too. You can upgrade your weapons for a fee, and don't expect to fully upgrade them on your first playthrough either.
Not enough cash!
It's a neat little thing, but you can actually keep your weapons between playthroughs, so it'll be handy if you climb up the difficulty ladder from the bottom. That said, it's a lot harder starting from a higher difficulty level, of course. Ammo isn't exactly in abundance here, and this is really apparent when you play on hardcore. I didn't really have to purchase so much from Duke on standard, but when I was playing through it the second time, I was regretting not spending more. I found myself going back to him more and more on hardcore, and even though I managed my ammo very well for the most part, it was a challenge. But it's not just guns, you get mines and pipe bombs too. And don't be afraid to use these because they are so helpful, especially when you're in a pinch and you just need to get away. I definitely under-relied on them the first time around, and I used them way more in my second playthrough. As I mentioned, you can either buy the ammo from Duke, or you can make it from gunpowder and scrap that you find along the way. The entire game is a balancing act, really, where you have to decide if you're going to make more ammo, or see if you can hoard supplies to make your first aid meds. It's up to you. And if you run out of ammo, you can at least block the enemy attacks, but it'll cause damage, causing you to scramble either way, so be careful. One of my favorite things about this game that I touched upon is going through these different parts of the game and each one brings out something different. I'm glad they went this route. If the whole game was just like the Demetrius Castle, then it would just have felt like Resident Evil 2 or 7 too much. If it had only been the Moreau and Heisenberg parts, then yeah, maybe it would have felt like 4 too much. My first playthrough of this game, I was making jokes when I was recording, and I was saying things like, oh, this part is very something something-esque, like Resident Evil 7-esque, or Gundam-esque. But jokes aside, I think this is where the greatness of this game lies. It's in the diversity in gameplay, and it keeps it fresh, fun, and exciting. It pushes you forward, making the next section of the game really something to look forward to. Sure, they could have gone full horror for this game, but I think that the more expansive area feels like a natural progression from 7. I'm glad they didn't go too big though, since the village seems like an appropriate size in my opinion. Bigger doesn't always equal better. I'm not sure what my favorite part of the game is, to be honest, but I think it might be the Heisenberg factory. Running away from this giant propeller monster was terrifying, especially through these tight corridors. And on top of that, you have to fight these weird cyber monsters that are stalking you through the factory. Sure, it's not these scary undead zombies, but it's something equally as unsettling. And of course, I did enjoy the action parts, of course. Running through the village with Chris was just so much fun. It was hilariously satisfying, and I just loved mowing down these lichens one after one. Of course, there's that sense of dread that comes up when tons and tons of them start to show up and your ammo starts going down. It does allow you to be a little bit sloppier than you would be with Ethan, but just for a brief moment. You know, I'm not really sure if I disliked anything in this game per se. Running through it twice, I really couldn't find anything I hated. I do think in terms of the story it was a bit over the top at some points, but a lot of these moments are explained at the end of the game, so I mean I kinda get it. I suppose if I do have a beef with this game, it's just how they treat Ethan, this poor guy. I swear, this man is just suffering embodied. The poor guy can't catch a break. Not only did he go through hell in Louisiana, he goes through it here too. Every time the guy makes a genuine connection with some other human, they usually die. When Ethan befriends the girl and her father in the beginning of the game, I just had a feeling on how it would go. And not only did she go, but everyone in the safe house gets absolutely wrecked, and I couldn't help but I laughed a little bit. I felt terrible, but I laughed just because, you know, it's not funny, but it's just so tragic I couldn't help it. This poor guy, they just can't give him a break. And in the end, he sacrifices it all to take out the village and Miranda so his daughter can live on. What an ending, but terribly tragic nonetheless. Hashtag leave Ethan alone. And when you finish the game, it's not exactly over either. There's the other difficulty options, but there's also the Mercenaries mode, which is available for 100 points, and it's straight up arcade style shooting away. It's a nice break from the main gameplay, kind of like the Chris section. I didn't manage to beat it completely, but I guess if you manage to get an SS ranking on each level, you'll get a nice surprise, but I don't think I'll be able to get that far. You also have other bonuses too in the game, like looking at the character models, the in-game movie, the developer artwork, etc. It really is interesting seeing how far things have come from the early development stages of Resident Evil 7. You know, I was really surprised to see so many people on YouTube not like this game. I've seen things like, well, the game is too convoluted, too much a mix of styles, it misses the mark. To me, I don't know, I think the mix works. You're never stuck doing something too long and they manage to switch it up on you at just the right time. I think the pacing's really good. I had a lot of fun with the gameplay. I enjoyed the different characters and the environments, and it felt satisfying as a whole. If you really had to push me for some nitpicks, I would say, well, the food system could have been better. Given how many choices there are, and seeing how your stock carries over between games, it would be really nice if they gave us more upgrades. Really make us work to get it like a God mode Ethan or something, but, well, technically you can buy unlimited ammo guns in the extras menu anyway, so, well, whatever. I will also say that the game does feel a bit linear at times too. Sure, the village acts as your main hub and you can move around it freely, but you won't be able to visit the areas you've already completed, like the castle. It would be nice if they had these stick around and you can just update them with stronger enemies as you progress more in the game. I think that would have been a better option. I don't know, not being able to enter them outright just seems like a bit of a waste. I mean, not saying you need the places to farm for items, but it would be nice to have the option. It feels very much like, okay, well, on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one. But to me, honestly, it's not even that big of a deal, and even after going through the game twice, I still really enjoyed it. It's amazing what they were able to do with what on paper seems like a limited setting. The game looks so beautiful, and I ran it on an Xbox One X with frame rate priority, so I can only imagine what this looks like on the newer consoles. I mean, yeah, sure, I can go watch a video on YouTube, but it's just not the same as having it in front of you. For this game, the devil's in the details. Having typewriters come back was a nice little aesthetic change. It would have been cool if they brought back the ink ribbons too, at least for the really hard difficulties, like in Resident Evil 2 Remake. You haven't experienced dread until you realize that there's a limit to how much you can save in a game, but I know, I get it. It kind of eliminates a more frustrating part of the game by not having these ink ribbons in. Small things like going up and down the ladders really call back to the old days of Resident Evil when you would have these loading screens consisting of doors opening, going up the stairs, climbing ladders. Of course, I'm happy with the fact that they've all but eliminated load times, so hey, no problems on my end with the instantaneous door openings. Oh, I also love how the title changes too, depending on which part of the game that you're in. Another sort of staple in Resident Evil is being able to outrun the enemies, and I kinda talked about this earlier when I was going through the stronghold. If you keep quiet, or you know the monster's patterns, you're able to sneak around them easily. Fight smarter, not harder is a series staple, I think, and it's nice to see that no matter how much the gameplay changes, there are just some things that are just ingrained in the DNA of Resident Evil. I wanted to point out that I played the US version of the game because, as always, both Japanese versions are censored. There is a video online that shows the differences and I'll link that below. That said, I think Capcom knows that there are big fans of the series who want to play the game fully uncut, fully unedited, and while they can't release it here technically, if you put the subtitles and the Japanese language options on the disc, importing it's no problem. I mean, there's no more region locking. I really enjoyed listening to both the English and Japanese dubs of the game. That said, some of the voice actors I did prefer the Japanese ones. I have to admit it, especially Heisenberg. I listened to him in Japanese first, where he sounds like he's straight out of an anime. I don't know, it's just something I thought about as I went through the game. I mean, both are good, and it's fun to see the differences between localizations and translations. I think Capcom did a fantastic job with this game and it lives up to my expectations, no doubt. I'd love to see where they go next, but it seems as if Ethan's story ends here. I liked him as a character and I felt he was like this more everyman kind of guy, but the way he went out was a bummer. That said, it does make the ending all the more powerful, so I understand it from a storytelling perspective. I read that Capcom is planning a trilogy of these games consisting of 7, this game, and the 9th installment, but I have no idea where it would even go, since the game just time skips at the end. But also, judging by the ending, Chris's story isn't over either, so it seems like they have some options in the storytelling department. I don't think it's a perfect game, but even after I've sort of let the euphoria dissipate, I'm still loving it and I'm having a blast going through it again. I'm playing Village of Shadows right now, and it is rough. I can barely get by the beginning. I think it's one of the better titles in the series, without a doubt. I'm not sure if it's better than 7 or not. I'd have to play that one again, and it's going to be compared to that one the most. But I think that with the diversity it brings to the table, it makes it stand tall, all on its own. Thanks again for watching, everyone. See you next time. Take care.